good morning, good afternoon, I don't know, good evening, whatever you're at. Today, David and I would be speaking about Manifesto. It's basically the policy, the lobbying work we are doing in Europe to try to get light pollution legislation at the European Union. We supposed to be joined by Alejandro, but unfortunately he's at the conference at the moment and he wasn't able to join us today. But he recorded a small video for us. So he will be, I think we can start with that video as some kind of an introduction of the work we have been doing. And then David would be speaking about the impacts of light pollution and why we need the legislation and policy on this regard. And then I will follow up specifically on the manifesto, some important points, and what is it kind of based on. So this is the plan. Drew, can you please share your screen and share Alejandro's video, please, for us? Thank you.
Hi, this is the presentation. I'm going to go super fast. This is about the, this started in a meeting in Granada. That was a follow-up of a meeting in Brno during the Czech presidency, and we created a manifest talking about the problem, the need of controlling light pollution, mainly because of environmental impact, and all the regulations, even international regulations that request this protection. Even light pollution is a kind of pesticide, but a kind of pesticide that we are not controlling and is killing a lot of pollinators. Well, mainly what we want to do is control the total amount of emissions in different colors, also the connectivity and also the landscape, because if we don't do these three things, we can screw up locally some places. Satellite data, we have a lot of techniques to do all this, like using satellite data, like BIRS, EMSP, SDG-SAT, lighting inventories, photometers. We have networks of photometers, DSLR cameras, fish eyes, modeling like SkyGlow, Illumina, many others. The EU have spent a lot of money in light pollution through the years, but even light pollution is still growing. No? And wind is because we are not actually controlling our policies and telling the people where is happening this increase. Even in Europe, if you measure wrongly, you can think that is not increasing light pollution, but we see that the blue light here is actually increasing. Also, the light pollution can travel very, very far, up to 300 kilometers in this case. On the Pyrenees, this light pollution, that means that impacts nearly every protected area in Europe is impacted by light pollution, but usually is not reported, even if we have other maps, even from satellite, that shows that there is light pollution nearly everywhere. There is some technical problems. That's why you need professionals that are trained on this topic. For example, BIRS and DNSP don't see this infrared light assist. This infrared light don't have impact in the environment, but the blue light of LEDs do have. And this is a problem. For example, even if we have different satellites, and that's why we need color satellites, that, for example, if you use BIRS, you would think that is a color reduction in BIRS of 50%. But actually, when you check with the ISS in color, we don't see nearly no changes because the municipality of Milan really wanted to do it like that. But the change in percentage of blue light increased by 37%. And the total amount was at 27%. We have maps. We are creating maps on color of Europe, and we want to do this globally. We need to control all this scheme and evaluate our policies to see if we are doing well or change the policies, and see the dangers of using something that you don't know how it works, think that you have done a reduction, or even that maybe you look flat for you when it's actually increasing. In other places like Madrid, for example, this reduction probably was true in this time, and now again we are increasing again. this will be real, but even larger because of the change of color. And even we can find changes in regulation because, first of all, this commercial center here was detected that they would try to turn off the light in late at night thanks to this satellite. So we really have the techniques to monitor the light pollution. What we don't have is the resources to do it. Thank you very much. I hope I can answer some questions to you. I'll give a more detailed talk other day.
Okay, thank you. This was a very, very brief introduction from Alejandro. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to be with us, but basically he wanted to highlight that there is a significant growth of light pollution everywhere in Europe. And we have all the techniques for monitoring and measuring it across Europe as well. And we have a strong, and obviously, like, because light pollution is increasing, we have a growth of environmental problems and further environmental impacts, which David is going to be addressing very soon. And there's a strong need for new policies and new laws, or the changes of laws if there is already light pollution laws, like, for example, in Italy. So this is why we created this manifesto. And now I would like to hand the floor to David, who will be digging us into more environmental impacts and environmental aspects of the problem within the Europe. David, shoot.
Thanks, Yana. All right, I will share my presentation, which I can also share afterwards. And we'll go slower than Alejandro did, so hopefully we can follow up nice and easy. Hopefully everyone can see that slide. I'm getting nods and thumbs up. Great, excellent. Okay, so I'll introduce myself first. My name's David. I work for a UK-based charity called Bug Life. We represent all invertebrate species. Whilst we're based in the UK, no longer a member of the European Union, we do still operate across Europe and internationally as well on all invertebrate conservation issues. We do that in a number of different ways, so through on-the-ground direct conservation, habitat restoration, like the background that I have behind me. We also try to encourage better relationships and information with regards to invertebrates, so that people treat them with the respect that they deserve. And then also my area of work is on influencing policy, legislation, and campaigning to make sure that invertebrates, and with that other aspects of the environment, are protected. And may not be surprised, one of the key issues that we're working on is light pollution. So been working closely with Yana and Alejandro and the three of us from very different backgrounds coming together on this issue to try and address it in the best possible way. Yeah. So I wanted to start off really by talking about the way that pressures on nature within the EU are tackled and dealt with, because it gives it some context as to why we're taking this approach. It's mostly, I think, for those who are unaware of how the European Union works. But what we do know is biodiversity across Europe continues to be shaped by human activity, as you'll know, and those pressures on habitats and species will remain really, really high as technologies advance, as population grows, as we have a changing climate. And to the European Union, they track these pressures, and we know that there are at least 67,000 individual pressures being placed on nature across the EU level. So light pollution being one of those things, there are a lot of things that we're trying to tackle when it comes to conservation and protecting the environment, just to give it a bit of an indication of what we're kind of up against in terms of nature conservation. And you'll see there the breakdown of different pressures there. Agriculture obviously having and kind of intensive agriculture impacting habitats, but species as well. Invasive alien species coming in from other parts of the world that then can disrupt ecosystems, forestry, climate change, which needs no introduction at all. Marine pressures and pressures on fresh water, habitats as well, and even then human exploitation of things. But I think it's key to note on this graph, on this image, not given perhaps the size that you would expect, but 50% of all of those 67,000 or so pressures related to pollution, whether that be in air, water, or soil. Those pollutants are having a drastic impact on nature. What we then try to do is obviously look at how we can reduce those, but whilst also maintaining kind of meeting human needs, and as our world advances and our needs advance, that's what we're trying to do. So light pollution sits in there as one of 50%, so 50% of 67,000 of pressures. Light pollution is just one of those. What you won't be surprised to know is that not all of these pressures are treated equally, and light pollution is certainly one of those that has not yet received the same level of treatment as some of the others within air and water and soil pollution. So this is an area where we're obviously all here collectively trying to work on, but particularly from the impact on nature. Why? I'm sure I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. You'll know that light pollution severely disrupts nocturnal ecosystems, interfering with those natural rhythms of plants and animals, changing behavior, and even having physiological changes in wildlife. So really, light pollution is a pollutant that is focused on the nighttime environment, of which around 2/3 of all species are either partially or wholly active. So when we're talking about this, light pollution really does actually expand a huge range of nature, and is actually a really significant pressure, whereas some of these other pressures may just impact an individual habitat or an individual species or an individual kind of temporal range of time. And as Alejandro kind of mentioned in his you may have called it in his introduction, the spread of light pollution is increasing rapidly, and particularly into key and important biodiversity areas across Europe, as kind of a highly developed part of the world. So it really is an issue that we kind of need to be addressing and kind of taking into this kind of collective European-wide piece of work. The good thing that we have, and I should say this is not just to kind of preach about the benefits of the European Union, particularly as a member of as a UK citizen who's left the European Union. This is not the only way of being able to tackle these things, but this is the framework that we have within the European Union, covering 27 member states, so a really good, huge portion of our part of the world in particular, but also a really good way of kind of bringing these things together. So if we have one piece of legislation that we tackle, it saves trying to tackle them at individual member states level. So it really is a framework that we use, but there are others, but this is what we're working with. So the European Union, it employs a kind of a comprehensive, multifaceted approach to addressing all of these pollutants that they've identified. And that involves a mix of legislation, so actually kind of changing the law, making these things have to happen, monitoring these pollutants, monitoring the impacts that these pollutants are having on nature and on society and on human health. And then also includes things such as financially supporting changes to improve these things and engaging the public with them. So kind of as a framework and taking this wide range approach, if we can tackle an individual pollutant within this framework, we have the opportunity to really cover a large area where we can learn some lessons and hopefully employ them elsewhere in the world, but actually kind of deal with this key issue of driving light pollution down to relieve that pressure on the natural world. So it's probably worth just kind of touching on a few of the kind of ways that some of these pollutants are tackled with through the European Union, to kind of give you an idea of what we're trying to replicate with our work on light pollution, and how we can fit the work we're doing on light pollution into this framework. So some of the kind of the packages that we have look at air quality, so clean air, aiming to reduce improve air quality across Europe by setting limits on pollutants. For example, we have then a package called the Water Framework Directive that aims to improve water quality in rivers, lakes, other freshwater bodies, and the marine environment, looking to improve the quality for nature, but also for people to enjoy within the ability to bathe, but also consume water as well. And then we have other directives that look at things such as waste, so reducing the amount of waste that we generate, but also improving the efficiency of reclaiming and reusing, recycling that waste as well. And then we have other pieces of legislation that look at things such as chemicals, making sure that we have a high level of protection from these chemicals that are being used, whether that being used in everyday life, in agriculture, or perhaps things that we're not even aware of yet. Just a kind of a few things that we're kind of looking at this governance at EU level. And the benefit of that being, we don't need to rely on individual member states to kind of come up with their own solutions to these things, or their own monitoring, or their own data gathering, or input to research bodies. They're able to access this kind of collective whole, which can really help in terms of implementing some of the requirements that are needed to improve the situation. And then the same can be said for things such as monitoring and enforcement of these things. We have a European-wide environment agency, which is where a lot of my images are taken from, and they're able to kind of look at data on environmental quality across the continent, which can really help inform decisions. So this expands it out from just kind of being in a single country to looking at cross-border impact as well, which for something like light pollution, which isn't just restricted to individual nations, could be really helpful. And then there are protection agencies within each of the nations to actually kind of monitor compliance and report those back then to the European Union to make sure that standards are being met and actually that these requirements are being enforced rather than just being placed on paper. Other good things then that we have within this scheme is obviously within the European Union is enforcement measures to make sure that action can be taken against any member states that fail to comply with European laws, including kind of being able to conduct inspections and audits. So hopefully you can kind of see that there's a benefit there of kind of having all of these things together rather than relying on kind of piecemeal approaches within individual countries. And then I think it's worth noting on some of the other parts that get forgotten, I think, within this framework, but actually the financial instruments that can come together by putting money into a pot can help really further our knowledge. So that can be used for kind of research and supporting research so that we actually gather more information and learn more about the impacts. And, you know, some of these things are definitely being done and used to support the work that we're doing on light pollution, but also we can fund restoration measures to help kind of, you know, take proactive steps to improve the situation using kind of a collective pot of money, which can really help some of the perhaps less developed regions or areas where, you know, their kind of national funding isn't perhaps available. And then finally, that idea of kind of reaching out and forming a global or kind of a sort of a European-wide citizen network, providing access to information so that we actually are able to know and study these things and share this information, as well as reaching out kind of and having kind of campaigns and awareness raising programs. So kind of a flavor of that sort of framework where pollution is tackled, but Yana will kind of explain a little bit more how our manifesto for light pollution will fit into that. So key question being really, do we have any progress? Is this working? Is this kind of this approach actually you know, worth following up with? And the good thing is that we do see progress. I wouldn't worry too much about the kind of the detail in here. There's a lot going on this graph. The key thing really is that we are seeing improvement in both the quality of habitats in the different areas across Europe and the different biogeographical regions that we have, and we're also seeing a improvement on some of the species as well. But I'll come on to kind of where we're not seeing perhaps some progress in the next slide. But the key thing to note really is that we are having success with this approach on certain things. So air pollution, I think, is a really good example where this approach is yielding results. We see a significant reduction in air pollutants, particularly in urban areas, where we see kind of improvement within some of the major cities of Europe, which is great. And again, kind of driven through EU legislation. We do, on the whole, see improvement in water quality, particularly some of the major rivers that run through Europe and lakes as well, and the same for bathing waters. If anyone's been following what's going on in the UK at the moment, that's perhaps not quite true for the UK. So there are areas where it doesn't necessarily get implemented in the same way, but in Europe and the EU as a whole, we have seen improvements through the package to improve water quality there. And on the whole, we've seen a decrease in use of hazardous chemicals. Kind of that ability to share information on where there may be impact can lead to restrictions on usage, even bannings on usage, and making sure that we're actually improving not only the environment for nature, but also for human health as well. So there are a number of kind of case studies that we can look to say, yes, this approach that we're taking to tackle pressures on nature in Europe is working, and we can kind of look to utilize that to address light pollution as one of those pollutants now. As I mentioned, it's not all good. There's still plenty of work to be done. We see habitats being degraded quite significantly, having, as you can imagine, from all of the threats and all of those pressures that I mentioned earlier. So there is still work to be done, whilst we are improving in some places. So forests, for example, are exhibiting an improving trend. We are seeing quite significant deteriorating trends in grasslands or dunes or bog kind of fenland habitats as well. So we see a bit of a mixed picture where there's been some real focus on certain habitats or certain areas. Things have moved forward, and then a deterioration on things that have kind of been neglected, unfortunately. And I think it's the same can be said for species. We see some real improvement in certain species where a lot of attention is being given to them, where they are improving their conservation status. The Iberian lynx just recently has had a really good population boom, where a lot of conservation work has been done across the Iberian Peninsula to improve that species. But then we're seeing the deterioration in other species as well, which is obviously, it's not great. We can't just focus on some and not all. So we still know that there's work to be done. And what kind of keeping an idea of these statuses and looking at these trends as a region as a whole can help us identify is some of the future challenges, things where we need to kind of invest more resource, invest more policy attention, and kind of drive the change forward as we learn more about our impact on the world. So some of the future challenges, looking at the emerging pollutants, which is perhaps a phrase you're familiar with regards to light pollution. It's often put into this kind of description around emerging pollutants, and I'll come on to why we don't believe that that's still the case for light pollution at the moment. But these include things at the moment such as microplastics and the impacts that microplastics are having on the environment, and also things such as pharmaceuticals. So those are human and veterinary-based pharmaceuticals, and how our consumption of these chemicals may be having an impact in freshwater or soil-based environments. So we're kind of starting to identify that, hey, we think there's an issue with these things. These are things that we need to be looking at to help send this picture of kind of a negative trend around and help bring it forward into a positive trend. And then also we can start looking at kind of some of those perhaps bigger scale issues around climate change and the impacts that that's having on pollution levels as well as habitats. So we can kind of start to see where we're going to need to be doing greater work across Europe in order to kind of reverse these trends and actually improve the status for nature. So I said I'd talk a little bit about why we don't think light pollution is an emerging pollutant, certainly anymore. The red list, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but the International Union for the Conservation of Nature produce a red list. They've been doing so since the 60s, which gathers expert information on the status of species and the threats that they face. So this is where we kind of get the information and the knowledge which says something is endangered or vulnerable or threatened. So we actually get an understanding of where we are with regards to species. A key thing to note is that of the threats of which they get coded, and there are obviously thousands of them, light pollution is one that is there, and it is growing rapidly. So currently of all of the species that are listed on the red list, around 190 odd, there are 190 odd, sorry, that are actually coded with light pollution as a threat to them. So this no longer means that it's just something emerging. It means that it's something that is definitely causing a problem. And certainly we see that in species that have been assessed that are deteriorating in their populations. So the numbers that I have here are those species that have been assessed that are either critically endangered through to kind of near threatened, and these all have deteriorating population trends. So the population of these species are dropping. The most recent update that was given just at the end of last month had an increase of those by the numbers that are going up on the side there. So we can see that this is increasing with every single new update that we're getting. We're seeing species, more and more species are being threatened by light pollution. And these aren't just invertebrates, where kind of the background I'm coming from, which kind of we have impact on things like fireflies and spiders, moths in particular, but it's coming from all areas, all taxas. So we're seeing bird species such as shearwaters and petrels being impacted. We're also seeing reptiles and amphibians impacted by light pollution, and even mammals, primates, are being impacted by light pollution. So this threat that has often been lumped into emerging pollutant is no longer emerging. It's very much there and is having an impact. So just a quick slide before I pass on to Yana to note that within Europe, obviously we have a whole raft of packages that look to restore and improve nature. Just recently, the nature restoration law has been approved and adopted by the European Union, which is brilliant for nature because it commits the Union to restore nature, land and seas and species by 2030 and 2050, depending on which area it is. And it also sets out targets on different areas, which are really important to make sure we're going in the right direction, but also to implement some of the measures that need to be put forward to actually restore nature, rather than just say, here's some legislation on nature. These are actually designed to restore nature. So we see targets on pollinators, forests, urban areas, rivers, agricultural land and spaces, and also marine areas. And so we have a whole host of targets there, all of which are impacted by light pollution, which helps when it comes to implementing some restoration plans, because light pollution needs to be taken into account. The law itself includes reference to mitigating light pollution, especially within urban areas. It didn't originally. We did some lobbying to get that included there, and it requires, or it means that member states, when they are creating their national restoration plans, should consider light pollution within those plans and should actually take this into account, which I think is the first time within EU law that we've kind of got that need to address light pollution. It's still quite vague. It's not as explicit as we would like it to be, but we're moving into an area where light pollution is now being taken seriously, and we have that reference there. And I should say from the target on pollinators, which is quite pertinent for my area of work, there is a pollinator initiative within Europe that we managed to get the impacts of light pollution addressed within there. So when member states are looking to improve pollinator populations and improve and meet pollinator targets, they should be looking at light pollution as one of the threats to them. So by having a legal requirement to meet and to restore pollinator populations, we've also got a bit of a way in there with regards to addressing light pollution, reducing its impact on there. And obviously, as I'm sure you can all appreciate, if we are reducing the impact of light pollution on pollinators, we're going to benefit all of the other areas that we see, including making sure that we're reducing the impact on skies, but also on human health as well. So this is a really useful law that's just come through. The kind of the hard work now starts to make sure that the targets are met and the implementation plans are delivered properly. So that's where we can look to influence going forward. But this is all very new and live, so we'll look to see how we can influence that going into the not too distant future. And that's it from me. I obviously will be able to answer any questions after Yana's spoken, but obviously feel free to drop me an email as well. So I'll stop there. I'll pass over to Yana to explain our European manifesto and how hopefully we're going to relieve the pressure of light pollution off of the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, David. It was really interesting, and I hope we'll really make it happen. So let me share my screen first. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
yes, we can.
perfect. Okay, perfect. So before I start, because I think I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning of this meeting, but I'm a lawyer and a researcher, and I'm working in basically legal recognition of light pollution as an environmental problem. I'm working with different national governments and also with the European Union, and I'm currently co-coordinating the European Horizon project on basically developing a science-based policy to change light pollution regulations in Europe. So it's all feed in the work we're doing here as well. So today I'm going to be talking about the manifesto. So what is its role, where we're going. I will also explain what is presidency of the European Council. I've seen in the chat that some people are aware about Brno Appeal, which was developed in Czech Republic. So look into that as well. I will explain you why we actually need the legal recognition, but basically David also touched upon it. It's basically we have to develop like overreaching regulations at the Europe and the policy at the European Union law to enable the changes at the national and the local level as well. This is how the law works and policy work in the European Union. And then I will explain the legal basis of our manifesto and our work, and then I will touch upon the support we need from all of you here and beyond. So this to start with, I think it's a very important point to mention is presidency of the European Council. European Council is basically a European institution, a government body where the ministries from different member states, they come together to negotiate and adopt the EU law and policy. So it's a very important agenda. And we're trying to put the topic of light pollution in every presidency which coming there, but some governments are not really working with us on this regard. It's very difficult to get it there, but we're lucky that we have some governments which accepted to have light pollution as one of the key major topics during the presidency. I will touch upon it later. And the second point is presidency of there is a presidency of the European Council. It's when one of the member states, so one of the countries within the European Union, becomes basically a chair of this council for 6 months, and the function is to determine the agenda and develop the program. Basically, they can address the topic and follow it up with the other institutions, for example, European Commission and the Parliament, so they can hand to the future legislators and policymakers. So this was a brief introduction on the policy work we're having. So now specifically on the presidencies of the European Council and what has been achieved lately, and this also involved the work on the manifesto. So the first country which actually took light pollution as a major and a key topic within the presidency was Czech Republic. It happened in 2022 during the Czech presidency. The Ministry of the Environment of the Czech Republic addressed light pollution as one of the key problems of the environment and the need to address it at the EU level. There was an international workshop on light pollution in Brno in October 26, where some of you maybe have been there. It involved representatives of more than 19 member states, including commissioners, DarkSky International, European Environmental Agency, and some other important organizations such as standardization and professional organizations. So it basically was a gathering of different stakeholders, which I think very important when we're talking about the light pollution, because we have to hear the different voices and to address this problem of the environmental impacts, energy efficiency, obviously, but also to balance it together with the issues which some people have when we talk about light pollution is the problem of public safety. So therefore, we have to hear all these voices to balance it up. So the result of the Brno meeting was the adoption of Brno Appeal to reduce light pollution in Europe. I will share a presentation with you so you can access all the links which I have here. This Brno Appeal basically addressed that light pollution is transboundary concern, which affects all the member states, and that the European Union has to develop the targets and the policy action to address the issue. And this appeal, it was hanged to the European Commission, and further it was discussed with in the meeting of the environmental ministers as well. So the subject was going on in the public agenda of the EU. Therefore, it was followed up by the Spanish presidency later in 2023. During the Spanish presidency, there was also a meeting on light pollution with the more specific aspects related to the need of the law, the need of the measurement and the monitoring. This meeting was held in November last year in Granada. It was organized by Spanish Ministry of Science and Innovation and involved also representatives of more than 15 member states. This meeting was basically dedicated again to discuss the issues surrounded by light pollution, including its environmental problems, of course, but also the needs and how we can monitor and measure the problem, and how we can basically make it a legal concern and why. So the result of the Spanish presidency was the Manifesto, which I will be talking later about, the Manifesto for Tackling Light Pollution and Proposing EU Light Pollution Monitoring. You can find the link in the chat. I think I've sent it earlier, so you can get acquainted with the text there. Further, it was also followed up by the Conference of Light Pollution, which was in Czech Republic. This conference also was a big stakeholder event. It's a kind of a policy level as well, which involved experts from different countries, not only EU. And also the idea was to discuss further how we can address the problem to the European Union. The main thing is that politicians, most of the politicians related to the green parties and environmental aspects, they agreed that there is a strong need to protect of the external environment and they need the action of the EU level. So what is the role of the manifesto? So why it was really important for us to develop this document within the Spanish presidency? It brings political attention. As David mentioned, and I said it again at the beginning of my talk, at the EU, we need this overreaching policy, which always followed by the member states. So if we address it at the EU level, the problem of light pollution, it will follow up by the national states, and hopefully we will result in the changes of the light pollution levels and the action. So within the manifesto, I put here some, in my opinion, the most important points of it, but it's obviously way longer. The main points are that we acknowledge the essential role of the natural and external environment for for humans and the environment and habitats and the biodiversity. We also acknowledge the important role of artificial lighting for well-being, because I think when you have a talk with the politicians, you also definitely have to say that light is also important, because obviously you cannot just propose the complete switch off of light if we are not talking about the protected natural areas. We also highlighted that artificial light is a form of pollution that contradicts with environmental protection. So here again, we propose some measures that the light should be completely reduced within the nature protected areas, or the light should be used with 5 responsible lighting principles, which I think you all know. And then we call the Commission and the member states to take immediate action to combat light pollution, assess the current magnitude of light pollution within the territory of the EU. So here we're talking about remote sensing, which Alejandro is doing. Like, for example, within the project we're working together now, the project is called Plan B. Alejandro and his colleagues, they're developing a light pollution map of Europe, which has the different aspects of it. So it will show the more or less clear picture of the current situation of light pollution in Europe, because we use remote sensing data, and we also do the measurements on the ground as well. So it's kind of will give us more or less clear picture. Obviously, it has to be continued by the national states and the EU. We also indicated the need to introduce permanent monitoring of light pollution, and of course, to include it at the European Union, you have the permanent environmental monitoring, which includes, for example, the monitoring of water pollutant or air pollution. So within the existing framework, you can just obviously include light pollution there. And then we proposed to adopt several measures, which you can look into that yourself, I think, because we don't have that much time. So the main ideas are to bring political attention and raise awareness of the problem at the high political level of the European Union, propose an action for the EU and the member states to tackle light pollution. We suggest legal and political recognition of light pollution as an environmental problem. This will actually, if we include light pollution with an existing European environmental protection framework, which consists of a lot of strict regulations, it will help us to reduce light pollution already without sometimes the need to adopt the specific law to address light pollution. And then it will continue to bring the matter to the other presidencies as well. So we will build up on this manifesto further. So what the manifesto is built, and how basically we explain how the current governance at the EU and the national states can act and why. And here are 2 main aspects. The first is the existing EU laws, policies, and regulations. So we basically highlighted that there is already a huge legal and policy framework which consists of a lot of instruments, they're mentioned here, which can be taken as a ground base for the action against light pollution. Some of this document, they already mentioned light pollution. Like, I will give you one example from it, maybe you're familiar with it or not, but we have in Europe Habitats and the Bird Directives, which are the main legal instruments to protect the nature areas. The main goal is to unite habitats across Europe to allow the free migration and the better protection of species. However, as we all know, light pollution creates wide corridors. For example, you have these nature protection areas in one country, then you have a road, which is a highway, and then you have another protected areas. So due to light pollution, we're basically reducing the protection of the habitats. Therefore, it's a violation of the Habitats Directive already without a specific mention of light pollution. And this was also confirmed by European Court of Justice with a case with European Commission and against Greece. If you want, I can also share the link on this case as well. And the first law, as David discussed already, the new law, Nature Restoration Law, is the first European law which basically specifically mentioned light pollution. And I think it's a very big achievement for us already. But we have to follow up, and basically we are aiming to the inclusion of light pollution in the existing targets, for example, in the EU biodiversity strategy. So the main idea of the manifesto is that we highlighted that current instruments are already able to address light pollution without the strong need to adoption of new laws and policies to basically governments can act easier than they think with lighting, right? And then another basis of it is the international legal and policy instrument and agenda. We obviously have such important international agreements like Convention on Migratory Species or Convention on Biological Diversity, and a lot of other United Nations Environmental Programme conventions, which already has been addressing light pollution before. Like here, I gave some examples on Convention on Migratory Species resolution. They adopted light pollution guidelines on wildlife back in 2020. Then there was some protection of bats from light pollution, and the recent global biodiversity framework. Despite the latest framework has not mentioned light pollution directly, it has target 7, which indicates that we need to address all forms of light pollution. And then in the description document kind of instruction, what governments should do, they indicated that they need to address also light pollution. So we put these instruments into the text of the manifesto. So, for example, commissioners or people in the parliament can see that there is already international action going on to address the problem. This is important because the European Union always follows up what has been done at the international level. And my final thing, what I want to say is we need your support. Soon, with DarkSky International, we will start a support campaign, and we will look for your signatures. Despite it doesn't matter if you're in Europe or beyond Europe. I think it's just to show that there is a strong need of support of light pollution regulations, like policies and laws. So thank you very much for your attention, and I think we have around 15 minutes to answer some of your questions. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Yana. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat now, and then we'll go ahead and moderate the questions as they come on through. Yana, we'll start with one question that we saw earlier in the chat. You addressed this question by saying one way we could support is by signing up for the pledge when that's released. Is there any other ways that we can support from outside Europe?
I think David can help me to answer this question as well, because we're developing it together. But I think the main idea is it will be the pledge, but we will also kind of create an official letter, which will be sent to some organizations. And if you are part of an organization, I think it would be important if you can sign that official letter as well, but we're still preparing it. I don't know, David, do you have something to add on that maybe?
Yeah, I think at this stage, kind of the support that we can show, so if we can show a wide range of support for this issue rather than just coming from a handful of people, it's going to be really helpful. That kind of the sign up page will just basically add signatures to it, but we'll probably also look to write to organizations beyond those that are currently working together on this to bring them in, show, look, here's a very easy and straightforward way to support tackling this issue, and then we can present that to the European Commission to say, hey, look, there's support across a wide sector, a wide range of stakeholders to address this. Here's how you can address this. So it's a stay tuned aspect at this stage, I think, really.
Great. There was a question in the chat about how strong is the DarkSky coalition to do lobbying at EU level?
And I think it's pretty strong. I think we have a lot of different groups in Europe, and currently we're trying to unite people together to kind of bring the common voice to the European bodies. I think it's pretty strong. I don't know, maybe David has another opinion, but I think it's growing, and we have a lot of different organizations involved in the topic. We have a lot of different stakeholders involved, both from, let's say, green related people like environmental organizations, but also a lot of lighting professionals. Even I've been in touch within the project, which is actually driving to mitigate light pollution in Europe. We have on board two professional lighting organizations. So
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I would say in the last 3 years or so, we've kind of progressed, sort of trying to get all of this collective knowledge into a focused position. This manifesto is a really key part of that, kind of actually getting, here's how we can implement change rather than just sort of kind of just increasing our knowledge and understanding. So we're a lot better connected than we have been. So I think that lobby is increasing. We are starting to get, I would say, policy experts, lobbying experts involved. Although you're probably looking at the two people that are kind of leading that, but that's because of our backgrounds and our knowledge. So we have that kind of resource to focus that. So it's certainly improving, but it's certainly not there yet.
And then another question coming through about kind of EU politics and how things work. If the EU Parliament adopts a new standard, is it binding law in all EU member states, or does it require local enabling legislation? Like, what's the umbrella? Yeah. Oh, great.
Sorry for interrupting. I just answered that question, but I think it's important to talk it through. Basically, the EU standards, they're not binding. But unfortunately, they're followed by the national governments and then the local governments. And when the national government reference this standard in their national law, they become binding. So despite the, let's say, non-binding nature of these European standards, we still have to work with people who are adopting these standards, because in the end of the day, they will be followed up by the national and local governments. So this is kind of easy way to explain it, I think.
All right, thank you. And then kind of on a different note, we had a question. David, can you explain curtains on light pollution?
Yeah, certainly. So that's a bug life campaign. Curtains for light pollution. It's very much a soft touch approach to engage the general public, make them start to think about light pollution in a different way. So very basic, ask for them, for the public to, when they turn their lights on inside, to shut their curtains or blinds to stop internal light escaping. It's obviously not going to make the huge scale of change that we need, but should start to change people's thinking about light being a pollutant rather than just being something that doesn't cause any problems. From an insect perspective, I'm sure people are familiar with it. Have your lights on inside, you have your window open in the summer, all of the insects fly into your house as well. So it's kind of, it works that idea of keeping the nocturnal environment outside and nocturnal. So yeah, you can find that on our website. If you're interested, anyone can sign up to it. There's just there's a whole load of resources which I'm sure people are familiar with, but it's very much light, soft, family-friendly touch to understanding light pollution in a way that perhaps they've not considered it before.
Great. And then we have some more questions about how we can support. Are there any things we can do specifically to support the cause? We can resource to good practice, but how can we put pressure to make this into law?
David, you want to start?
Yeah, so I think, the first thing is that you're all here as advocates and kind of understanding this as an issue. So, this network's really strong, and I think we're working closely with DarkSky on this. So, any resource that we have that comes out that we perhaps ask you if there's an opportunity to influence your policymakers, we'll make sure to do that. I think, that's the best thing to do. Obviously, speak to your elected officials about this issue. Like, we as individuals have a voice. We should, try and use that as best we can. So, wherever these messages are coming from is going to help that kind of bigger and collective cause. But we'll always try and provide I suppose that resource that's required if there's a specific ask that we can get people to rally behind.
Great.
I think I will just add on that. I think if you're a lighting designer or lighting professional, I think it's important in your community and in your work to follow up the principle that you first have to protect the nocturnal environment, the presence of dark environments, and then impose the light based on that principle, rather than first impose the light and then think how to reduce it. I think this is kind of the key from the practical point of view.
Then going back up to a question, I think this is something that we're probably all thinking, those of us who are not necessarily in Europe, but what are the prospects for replicating these efforts in other countries, including the United States? Is anyone working on globalizing these EU efforts? And maybe this is not a question just for you, but we'll start with you both.
It's a question for us.
Awesome.
Kind of.
Yeah,
David.
we're also doing that. Yana and I, and working with DarkSky and some of the people on how we can do this globally. So there's kind of a lot of work going on to implement that. We mentioned the Convention on Biological Diversity, so it's the United Nations Environment Programme Convention, where we have the opportunity to push light pollution as something that is adopted as a recommendation for something to be addressed to improve biodiversity. It's not binding, but if we have it on an international level, it is something that then has to feature into the parties, so the countries that sign up to that in their national plans. So we're looking at how we can influence that. We had a kind of a very brief go at the last global meeting of those parties a couple of years ago, and then we have another opportunity coming up in October this year, where we're looking to try and influence that. So we've kind of just tried to replicate what we're doing at kind of an EU level onto a global level as well. And yeah, so that's kind of an ongoing thing, which I'm sure we'll be able to share more information about once things are kind of ironed out a bit more.
Sounds
Yana,
good.
I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, you did well. I mean, we're basically building up on what we're doing in Europe and then scaling it to the international level. Because basically we're touching upon all these international instruments, which I very briefly mentioned in my talk. So.
Great. And we'll go ahead and ask one more question since we're almost to the hour. We have a question more about kind of more grassroots movement. In Portugal, there's no such thing as light pollution restrictions. How could I start approaching city halls, industries, and alert from this problem and persuade them to change? So someone in Europe who's kind of looking for starting at ground level, what would you suggest?
To start
I
with
think
a workshop.
Yeah, you know, replicating almost what we've done here. But I think, like I say, you have a voice to be able to go and speak to those elected officials. So that's going to be kind of your first place, but also gathering other advocates that are perhaps interested in this issue. And if there's none through this this network, then looking to some of the nature networks, some of the perhaps other astronomy networks or human health networks locally as well, so you can kind of build up that background, because there's definitely a strength in voice, and just speaking to as many people as you can speak to. That's kind of the whole point of being an advocate. You will find those inroads as to how you can meet someone who's got more influence, and yeah, hopefully you'll be able to kind of find the right people to speak to within the city hall or within the government. And you can certainly point to, with regard to Portugal being a member state of the EU, you can point to this work and encourage them to get involved in any future workshops on light pollution that are being led, potentially take that up through your MEPs as well, as kind of locally.
Fantastic. Well, there's a lot of comments thanking you both, Yana and David, for this great talk. It's very inspiring. It's incredible work that you guys are all doing. We at DarkSky will make sure that we continue to update everyone about the European Manifesto. So I would encourage you to go to darksky.org, and we'll drop a link directly in the chat. But if you go to darksky.org, if you sign up for DarkSky's e-news letter, it's a newsletter that we send out monthly, we will be sure to put updates in there and links to the European Manifesto as it is continued to be built out. So make sure to sign up to learn more there. That said, I think that we are good to adjourn this Advocate Action meeting. Thank you everyone for attending. It was very well attended. This was fantastic. And thank you again, Yana and David.
Thank you very much for
Thank you,
listening to
everyone.
us.
Goodbye, everybody.